This is cool. I got this thing over here. It's kind of cool. Yeah. Okay. All right. Uh, Evening, everyone. Welcome to the August meetup of the Greater Philly Mac Admins. Uh, we don't have any special picture here today, but yeah, thanks for jumping on. And we'll get started right in here because we do have a special guest today. So, of course, our normal agenda will cover all of the updates to all of the Mac OSs. It's weird seeing 4 there, but we will have 4. We have some items of interest, our conferences, and then, of course, our special guest, which we'll get right into. So, what is new? What's new? macOS Sequoia 15. We are on beta 7 right now. And if you're
Or
not aware,
15.0.
for 15.0, right? If you're not aware, 15.0 and 15.1 are available for testing. 15.1 is for testing Apple Intelligence. I wouldn't say only, I guess, but it is the one that adds Apple Intelligence and has a bunch of its features. It is also a little behind on the beta cycle. But for everything else, you might want to test 15.0 if you're going to be planning to release that to your environment sooner. And if you're not part of it, beta.apple.com, or if you are at all any part of IT, you might want to do appleseed.apple.com/IT and get in on the betas. It is quite late right now, but you know, there's always time. Sonoma, we're still here for Sonoma. 14.6 and 14.6.1 were released. There were improvements for the 14-inch MacBook Pro as well. I believe it added something with added the ability to add another screen or to in clamshell mode, and there's advanced and some changes to advanced data protection. There were a bunch of CVEs added in 14.6, but 14.6.1 has no published CVEs. It was literally a fix for the advanced data protection. I don't know if anybody was hit by this issue. I was not. My environment was fine. So, link to the release notes and the enterprise release notes as per usual. So with that, we go to Ventura, which is still obviously going to be supported. 13.6.8, 13.6.9 were released. We are just in the security releases for Ventura. Just the enterprise release notes and the release notes there. Nothing major coming out for these. The only thing that any updates will be coming out for from now on are probably Sequoia, but there you go. And last but not least, macOS Monterey 12.7.6. We originally thought that 12.7.5 would be the last version, but then this one came out. So there you go. It's security updates. We will ask the question of why haven't you upgraded yet? Maybe if you haven't because of a vendor, maybe talk to your vendors and burn them to the ground because that's bad. You should not be on Monterey. Don't do that. And I will also say this is probably the last we will see of this in our decks because as we know, Apple announced the next event is 9.9, which usually is indicative of a release. So, and Apple's famously N-2. So Monterey will probably go bye-bye. This is the last time we see it in this deck, most likely. We're fingers crossed. And there are your release notes and your enterprise release notes for macOS Monterey, which I haven't touched in a very long time. And I hope most of you haven't either. All right, our items of interest. As I mentioned, Apple's event is announced for September 9th. Will there be new iPhones? Will there be new iPads? Will there be an M4 Mac? We don't know. It's anybody's guess. What we do know is, well, we actually don't know anything, but we assume is that we'll get a date for macOS Sequoia and for iOS 18 for the GA. So hopefully you're ready. There was a vulnerability that was advertised around in macOS, in Office applications that allows malware to bypass PPPC. This was fixed in Teams and OneNote, but not the other apps. I didn't read too much into this, but I thought it was a very interesting finding, and that a malware was using good known apps, of course, to bypass these PPPC controls. Link here will take you to a good read on it. And in preparation for macOS Sequoia, without breaking any NDAs, make sure you bother your video conferencing vendors to support the new Apple screen sharing APIs, or you'll be dealing with a lot of prompts. I should have put a picture here. That would have been a really good thing for Past John to do, is to put the prompts all over the place on here. But there is a prompt that you will be alerted for, and I actually just got it on Zoom that it will say, "Hey, do you want to allow this? It's, you have full screen access on here. Do you want to allow it for a month and for a week and things like that?" So all their conferencing softwares.
We can't PPPC that or grant
No, you
approval from
cannot.
MCF?
You cannot.
Well, that really sucks,
Yep.
John.
At least not at this time. And I think they've not said that there's any indication that it's working as intended, as apparently. So
right. Yes.
The issue is is that Apple is doing their passive aggressive thing to get vendors to adopt their new API. So
right. Yep. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? So yeah, definitely bug your vendors for this. We'll talk after the recording, because I don't know how much is under NDA or anything like that, but I know that there are some questions about this, so we'll keep those questions for the end. All right, conferences. We are at the time of year where all of the videos are posted. Mac DevOps YVR, PSU Mac Admins, Mac Sysadmins, and Jamf Nation are still open. And then, of course, Macaduck has their videos posted weekly. Objected by the Sea, if you're lucky enough to go, the registration is open there. So we are having a lot of conferences posting their items, and we still have a few left up there. So if anybody is going to any of the conferences that are still open, good on you. Always represent the group there. And I'm going to now hand it over to our special guest, Dave Siederer.
Siederer.
Siederer, dang it. See,
don't
I asked you before the call and I forgot it. So
you're considerate. That counts.
I tried. So I'm going to relinquish sharing control over to you, Dave, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm going to switch over to actually my other connection here. And naturally, of course, this being Zoom, it didn't tell me that there was an update required until right now. But I'm going,
Just while that's happening, Dave was my Apple SC at SHI before he left. To go to AWS.
Yep.
Nice.
Same. And Dave and I worked on a couple things for us for a while.
We had fun. Honestly, in my opinion, I'd say we all had fun. But I'm honestly having a lot of fun now. So I'm going to open this up because I have a slide for this, and while we're waiting, this is a perfect time to open this up because this is a little bit of a does anybody know thing. What is actually it looks like it let me on simultaneously, so I may be able to do both. Very cool. And close out the audio. I can continue without that. Neat. I was expecting this to just kick me right out. So now I can actually share that thing I was talking about. And so I will say I'm working through titles for this particular presentation. Right now it's titled the Levels of Abstraction, macOS through Matryoshka. Thought it was kind of neat. We'll get to that in a moment. Big question though, and this is to everybody around. What is the significance of today's date to Apple? August 27th.
I'm never any good at this Apple trivia.
The last time I tried Apple trivia, honestly, it was on the floor at JNUC and nobody got my question either. So I might need to to start scaling these back. So the first clue is nothing of note that I actually asked Claude 3.5 whether it knew through Perplexity. Nothing actually of note happened on this date involving Apple. And that's weirder, right? And final clue is 1956. I'm just curious to see if that itches anybody's mind.
1956, is that the Dartmouth conference? Was that?
Oh, now I got to look up if that maybe this date does mean something that I haven't figured out yet. What the date? Yeah, what this is?
Was that when George Orwell's 1984 was published? Or was that
Oh,
earlier?
now I got to check that one too. I feel like that's earlier, but I'm not positive.
I think it's earlier.
The Dartmouth conference, it was in 1956. I forget the dates, but that's when
Hmm.
the term artificial intelligence was coined. So,
Wow. That's a really cool coincidence that I happen to ask AI about this too, and it didn't have a clue.
yeah.
So if you ever had a classic Mac, and you've had the battery run out on you, there's a few different dates that it'll revert back to. January 1st, 1904 was like the oldest of the old, but a whole bunch of them were August 27th, 1956. And the closest information I can find out as to being why was an Apple Fritter post about somebody who said it was a guy named Ray's birthday who worked on it. So I'm honestly going to go out of my way and figure out if I can figure out who Ray is. So yeah, I went through a couple of titles through this. I was also thinking of Mac and a Mac and a Mac, virtualization, nested virtualization, bare metal. I also decided, what if I went Shakespearean with it? And when that happens, you basically just kind of run out of room. It runs over your name and you get carried away. So what is the difference? We're going to go through bare metal versus virtualization versus cloud. What the hell are all of these? Some of this is going to be obvious stuff. Some of this is probably not going to be obvious stuff. And I'm going to go into a little automation of kind of how to get cloud things and what Jamf enrollment looks like for that. So let's get to the easiest one, bare metal. So that's just running macOS on a Mac. So it's probably the one you have in front of you. It's made of Matter. And that license that you get for macOS, it allows for the OS to run on macOS hardware plus up to 2 virtual machines. And we'll get to virtual machines, of course, inside of that. This is one of those things that I like to mention is if you're ever remoting into a Mac, whether that's hardware or virtualized, there is a rule that it can receive one plain old VNC connection, but up to 2 connections if one's from another Mac. So if somebody's on screen sharing, you can actually log in as a different user from like a Windows machine that's plugging in through VNC, for example. And of course, automated enrollment for this is dependent on the chain of ownership. So I wanted to get also a little bit of this is examples of how to get things. And this is most likely the simplest one. Get a Mac. You can your friendly neighborhood reseller or Apple store. Don't do larceny. Don't steal Macs. Chain of ownership also makes automated device enrollment a challenge in that case. And of course, this is the kind of caveat to physical Mac is it takes however long it takes to physically get to you. And even with Apple stores and folks running couriers, there's times that sometimes you could just use a Mac a little bit sooner than God, I've seen 4 hours that some of this is dangerous to spend money. But yeah, that's and a lot of the time it makes sense. You may not need that Mac forever. And remember, depending on your reseller, setting this up in advance in any way other than ADE may not really be as much of an option. So you may end up with that blank machine each time. And in some cases, you have your workflow that automatically does everything. In some cases, you have a workflow that automatically does everything before the user gets their hands on it so that they're onboarded an hour earlier, for example. So now on to virtualization. So before Apple Silicon, you saw hypervisors like VMware's ESXi, which is basically an operating system that would run on top of the Apple hardware and provide a way to spin up virtual machines on top of that. It kind of decreased some of that overhead in being its own operating system. When Apple Silicon came along, though, it wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't quite feasible to do that, quite that full-on hypervisor. So the virtualization framework was introduced. I say here with Apple Silicon. It was actually, I think it was a revision later in macOS 12. And there is a hard restriction to 2 simultaneous running VMs. So like we said before, if you want to run a VM, you can. If you want to run 2 at the same time, you very much can. If you want to run 3, you'll have to stop one of them. You can have as many as you want on a hard drive, of course, but simultaneous is always 2. Sequoia is bringing in support for both Apple account sign-in, because this did not work on virtual machines prior to, and nested virtualization, that was where I got some of the Mac and a Mac and a Mac. Honestly, I want to put a little bit more time into really figuring out what kind of trouble you can get into with nested virtualization. But knowing that it's there, and as somebody who likes to make trouble in this sort of thing, I'm excited. And keep in mind too that some cloud providers that are out there, you do get a VM. It's not Amazon. We are going to get to what the heck my thing is before this is over. But it is important to remember that sometimes if you're getting a Mac through a provider, that may not be a full-on bare metal Mac. That may just be a virtual machine running inside of that Mac. And yeah, Mike, that's a very good question. How deep does it go for the licensing? Is everyone licensed for a split license And once upon a time, I ran soft PC, and what was it? I grabbed some kind of like real-time operating system and threw that on top of it on my Mac LC just to see if I could do it. So yeah, that's definitely, that runs in my blood. Of if let's see if it works. No matter how practical it is. Speaking of which, performance is very dependent on RAM and resources. So you can run 2 virtual machines on a Mac, but should you? It really depends on what you're doing. If it's a light task for both of them, it may make some sense. Also dependent on how beefy your machine is. If you have a Mac Studio, you might have 128 gigs of RAM to play with. If your virtual machine just doesn't need that kind of hardware, or that kind of hardware split less than in half, then most likely you'd be doing pretty well there. And snapshots. We're going to be talking a little bit more about snapshots and imaging, which is something I know we don't usually talk about anymore. But we're going to see something rise from its grave, and already you can get that instant boot from a virtualization and have that configured exactly the way you want it in that snapshot. It's something incredibly convenient when it comes to VMs. And yeah, that question of kind of why or why not. Parallel tasks. If you've got something that you can easily parallelize, that's definitely the easiest, one of the best ways to go about it. Preserving those exact configurations at points in time, that snapshot of even just the active session that's happening. Running beta versions of macOS too. If you want to get your hands on Sequoia, you can only go back so far with Apple Silicon to macOS 12, I think, or 12 or 13. It was the one where the virtualization framework was actually introduced. Testing with MDM is not always the most straightforward thing. The virtualization framework gives you a random serial number, which is something a little bit on the odd side. And doing things like automated enrollment, especially also with things like signing in for ADDE and ADUE, that's something that's been a challenge with virtualization and just getting that sign in to happen. And again, it doesn't just split that 50-50 when you have two Macs running. You've got Mac OS running on top of that, and a bit of overhead to boot. And yeah, the feature set, this is one of those things you'll see most of the vendors that are out there. There are definitely some very distinct feature sets among them, and like how they orchestrate, how they spin up things. But a lot of the time, the base features are just the virtualization framework. It's what Apple allows. So sometimes you'll see, somebody's got this new feature, and that's new to the framework. And portability is not always a guarantee. You can ask a lot of folks that are dealing with moving from VMware to other vendors. It's not always as simple as take one image file and drop it into the other. So how do you get a Mac in your Mac? This is probably the easiest one. You can just download an app. UTM is one of the most popular. I'd say Tart is one of the easiest to run. They actually have on their website tart.run just a few. I think it's three lines of code, and it'll actually have your virtual machine up and running for you right away. Virtual Buddy is one of I was going to say new kid on the block, newer, I suppose, but more around orchestration for kind of spinning up multiple VMs over time. I just realized I missed one name on here, which is Virtu Anka, which is more of a commercial solution to sort of do that same idea of managing a whole bunch of VMs, spinning them up, down, however you need from your workflow. And yeah, there's VMware Fusion actually does still exist as I think it's a zero cost product now, and very it's a strange world we live in, because it was VMware Fusion at one point was no more for Mac OS, and now it's for everyone. So I just hope it keeps going. And just touching on containerization, which is in short, and this is going to be kind of high level, a VM, but not all of them. And containerization is really an app with all the dependencies it needs, the architecture that it needs in kind of one big file or list of instructions. You'll see this a lot in server-side Linux applications. And the reason you don't see this in macOS a lot is because licensing does make this sort of thing challenging. When you're running just a chunk of the operating system, what a Mac needs to run in order to run macOS, you may be using some things that are subject to who knows which licenses, and that's definitely been something that folks have been looking into. So containers are not non-existent on macOS. So Docker Desktop exists. Mac Stadium does have their Orca offering. We actually do also offer Mac Stadium Orca in the AWS Marketplace. So if you're looking to containerize, you can containerize anywhere. Darwin Containers is a project that started as macoscontainers.org, and I don't think I'm not sure if it resolves anymore. But it's a very cool project, and I'm not sure how much further it's gotten off the ground, but definitely something I'm keeping my eye out for. And along with, honestly, if there's ever anything, any other tips on new containers, feel free to get over. And finally, just Mac in a data center. So you can get a Mac where it needs to be, kind of closest to the network. Depending on your provider, commitment times can vary. There is that 24-hour absolute minimum, because Mac OS says in the software license agreement, you can lease a Mac for a minimum of 24 hours, and then you can give it back at any time. In our case, you can give it back at any time. Setup times can vary. So depending, you may need to either send in a PO or send in, depending on the stack, send a few API calls. And in cases I mentioned earlier, maybe a VM itself, which in some cases is something that you want, and in some cases may not be the right thing for your workflow. And various storage options are definitely something that we see. Just the ability to have this when you're in a data center, you do usually have that some semblance of network attached storage. So what the hell is the Amazon one? So that's it, and I promise I'm not going to leave it at that. It is a Mac Mini in a tray with a green board and a whole lot of wires coming out of it, and a black box to the right. So EC2 Mac instances themselves, this is an EC2 Mac instance. It is bare metal. That's that Mac Mini at the heart of it. In order to run Mac OS, you need Apple hardware. So that is Apple hardware in order to run Mac OS. You can do type 2 virtualization. So you can spin up stuff like Tart or Virtual Buddy right on here as well. There are images. So coming back from the undead, Amazon Machine Images, or AMIs, allow you to actually take a frozen in time snapshot of what this machine is running. So rather than kind of have the choice being either everything comes from a monolithic image or nothing comes from a monolithic image, this is really giving you the opportunity to use the best of both worlds. Images aren't required, but it is something that's usually there's at least some advantage to some customization. And it's basically what you need to do is once you get things the way you need them, you pretty much make you can go to the console or make an API call and have an image created right from a snapshot. And those are resizable too. So the reason that there are images is that the storage and networking is all coming over Thunderbolt. So yeah, the amount of wires that are coming off of this are definitely for a reason, and several of those is definitely for bringing in not only some very fast storage, but yeah, or networking, but yeah, actually EBS or elastic block store storage that can change size, and literally if you need a new size, reboot your Mac and run a quick command and your size is there. And I love this, John. You beat me to the punch. One pokey robot. There he is on the black box on the upper right here. My favorite, a robot finger. And the robot finger will push the power button when it needs to for firmware updates, for cycling power, and it's something that our engineers looked at many different ways to do and found that this was actually the most dependable. And you can, in order to get one of these, there are definitely options. I forgot I was going to put etc at the end of that, but there's a lot of TLAs that you can use in order to start an EC2 Mac. So yeah, not only via the actual console command line, we'll look at that in a minute. AWS has an API too, and if you use stuff like Terraform or CloudFormation for infrastructure as code, that's also another way to take care of just doing this stuff without having to do it all on your own. And I miss lights out management too. I was an Xserve administrator once upon a time. So yeah, every time, whenever I'm kind of seeing this, it's like it's neat being in the spirit, and it's amazing thinking about how we had a couple of features that would have been really useful in our in the cloud. I think without it.
I was the same. I missed it.
Yes, I had my key around somewhere, but yeah, and once you kick that that start off, EC2 Mac is going to be ready in about 6 to 20 minutes is the average time. And I'm mentioning the 24-hour minimum again, just because this is something that I never want somebody to be surprised about when they say, okay, I want to get started with one of these. And they say, okay, I'm done with it after a couple hours. And they say, you can't release it yet. This is why you can't. And this is when it does let you know when you can. But this is the reason that's something that that's not why that happens. And just to dive in, EC2 Mac launched with the Mac 1, which was a 2018 Mac Mini x86 with 32 gigs of RAM. That was definitely a pretty great thing, especially to a lot of our customers doing development, really being able to get their Macs on demand and cycle these in a way that they can get fresh devices. And once the M2 came out, we introduced the Mac 2 instance type, which is not confusing in any way. In our defense, I think it speaks to how secretive Apple can be, that they didn't exactly tell anyone that the M1 was coming out with when we named our thing Mac 1. So we have Mac 2 as representing the family for Apple Silicon. which hopefully should simplify that just a bit. So Mac 2 is just the plain old Mac 2 is an M1 2020, 16 gigs of RAM. The Mac 2 M2 and M2 with 24 gigs, M2 Pro 32, and the M1 Ultra. This is actually a Mac Studio. This is an offering that is available, but hasn't been necessarily publicized much. But this is if you need all of the power, you can definitely get a whole lot of it with the M1 Ultra and 128 gigs of RAM. I've thrown a lot at these, and I don't think I've seen it blink yet. And let's take a look at how to get one of these. So I mentioned a whole lot of different ways. This is the AWS command line. So what you're looking at are a pair, I guess, three terminal commands. First one, I'm setting a couple of variables. I'm setting the instance type. I'm saying I want an M2 Pro. I'm setting my image ID, that AMI ID. The key pair name is how I connect to an EC2 Mac is not going to be a password for the first time. It's actually an SSH key pair. So that's something that can be defined. That can also even be generated at the time as you're spinning up your instance too. So that's something that doesn't even need to be reused. And for the region and the availability zone as to physically where you want your Mac to be. So that's running two different commands here. One to allocate the host. I mentioned that since this is a dedicated host, you do have to run this first command, and this kicks off that 24-hour clock. I'll mention this because I always do the auto placement on comment being there. That just makes it easier that when you start when you go to say, okay, I want to run this image, I want to start an instance onto this host, you don't have to say which one. You can just say, I need a Mac of this type. And as long as you have one of those, it just grabs it right away. And then the run instances command just right under that is taking care of kind of all the rest of that. Once you have your host, you're saying, I want this image on top of it. And keep in mind too, I didn't mean to gloss over this, but that image is not something that's fixed in time. You're not just key to running the latest version of macOS or an older version of macOS. This is you can go back to many compatible versions, most compatible versions to the hardware via the EC2 AMI marketplace, or rather the AMI listings. You can actually there are public listings with Amazon vended images of Mac OS, and that goes back for some of the Mac 2 instances, I think, to 10.14. So if you ever do have that that sudden need of I need to get old, you can actually do that in usually a pretty quick way. And just a bit on Jamf MDM enrollment, since these are a bit different. We're saying it's not a virtual machine. It is bare metal. This isn't something that is the serial number for this belongs to AWS, so it's not something that would be in within Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager for that type of workflow. What we've developed actually is, we'll take a look. Here's an instance running on a host here. And this is a script that I've written called enroll EC2 Mac. It had a funnier name earlier, but didn't clear. And enroll EC2 Mac is going to do a few things. Specifically, this is written with Jamf enrollment in mind, although it can be, it definitely can be retrofitted to other types of MDMs. It just needs an enrollment profile. This is actually going to go out and grab credentials first to use for the Jamf API. It goes up to the Jamf API next through the network and runs a create invitation call. So that comes back with an invitation code. The script itself takes that invitation code and forms the MDM enrollment profile to an XML profile from that, and takes care of automating the rest. So it actually does get the Mac enrolled and communicating with Jamf two ways. And I will say that here's what it looks like in action. actually start it. And this right now, it's running DP notify over it right now, which is not a requirement. It's actually off by default now. But primarily that's for if there was a user that we're trying to get to this before it was enrolled. This way it would ensure that they wouldn't. So this process is something that, as we're watching this, does not have to be is not something that you really see normally. As long as you have auto login on as part of the it's part of the setup process in the GitHub repo that I can share with you guys. That actually will this is something that occurs before a user can even log in. You can restrict you can even restrict sharing, you can restrict screen sharing before that that this process is even complete. So I keep joking, my demo keeps getting worse and worse as my code keeps getting better and better. And honestly, there's even more to show in, I'd say, the near future on making this process an even smoother one. So I do want to close, of course, with some additional QR codes, and one of which I apologize, my CI/CD reference architecture QR is not showing up on screen. But with the EC2 Mac MDM enrollment automation is the primary repository for that. If you want to check out just some information on getting started, we do also have some videos and blogs available on an accompanying repo. And that's I can also say there will be a video in the very near future that dives into a step-by-step. Okay, I want to get a Mac. I want to get it enrolled into Jamf. Here's how to do that. So yeah, I've actually put the finishing touches on the edits, and that one should be available to folks soon. That is for what I have. Oh, there it is.
There's the image.
There's CI/CD. It was shy. But with that, I mean, the biggest thing, thank you everybody so much, for time, attention, and hit me up on Mac admins. Absolutely happy to talk about this, talk about old Apple history. I've got a couple of brain dates going on the in JNUC if anyone's attending. Thanks again.
Thank you
Thanks, Dave.
so much, Dave. Yeah, this was awesome. Actually, I've not had a chance to dive too deep into AWS. My org is a Azure org mainly, but I did do a bunch of the AWS training. I missed my test date twice when I was doing originally the AWS, some of the AWS certifications, and I just was like, yeah, I'll just go with Azure. But I have one question, and it's a silly one, but why no Mac Pros? Is there a reason why there's no Mac Pros in there? Is it just hardware? I mean, that's literally it.
To be honest, like I can't give you a for sure answer because the service team does kind of work on their own. From what I understand, though, the way that our data center is set up, or the way that the tray is set up, it's set up for a Mac Mini, and we were able to retrofit that to Mac Studio as well. But most likely, I would be curious to see, I guess, a Mac Studio versus or several Mac Studios versus one Mac Pro, kind of like the how many physically can can keep up with another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a silly question. So I'll leave it over to other people, though. If anybody has a question, that now's the time.
Yeah,
to ask.
I do. Thank you so much, Dave. I do have a question. When a new Mac OS comes out, I don't want to compare apples to oranges here. Like, I'm a Linux admin for AWS, and when a new kernel is released, it takes a while for AWS to even allow that to be available, as they are scanning and everything like that. Is there a way for them to do due diligence on a new Mac OS? Since we're talking apples to oranges here. They can't scan it like they would grabbing it from an open source image.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is that it's been historically faster, and I don't see any reason that that's going to be different. Typically, we see for point releases, it's usually within a few weeks of release. For major macOS releases, an AMI is going to be available usually within a few months. I it's I think we have some kind of rough dates like that. I say a few months, and it's been usually on the shorter side, and historically. In addition to that, it is possible to do in-place upgrades. That is something that is a bit intensive when it comes to any of the Apple Silicon instances, because of and I was gonna say that if anyone knows this headache, disk ownership. Disk ownership means that if you do actually have to sign over, there's a little bit of a manual process that happens that has to happen before you're able to do an in-place upgrade, and you basically would need that kind of base firmware to be up to date on anything that you'd be deploying that image to also.
I know all about volume ownership, all about it.
Yeah.
It's fun.
I have a
Yes.
I have a few scripts out right now, and one of them is codenamed Orbital Velocity, and that one is hopefully something that's going to make that a simpler process. So yeah, I've been extensively testing now, and I'm probably a click or two away from getting the automation on that full automated. It's a good one.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, yes.
Wondering if Johan can't.
yeah.
So Johan McGuire question: will macOS instance support for resource groups be added? I had to write some lambdas for auto scaling management.
So yeah, there is actually resource group support available with AWS License Manager. It is possible to actually use that and have the hosts in a host resource group. I'm when it comes to auto scaling, this has been kind of one of those the bigger ways to go about that. I'm going to paste a link into the chat also with a it's the blog itself is on the older side, but the actual methods and everything that's done, it remains the same. You mentioned this is not having to write the lambdas for auto scaling. This is using AWS stuff, specifically License Manager and EC2 auto scaling itself to scale up, scale down, however you need to, based on whatever metric that you're able to either feed into CloudWatch or trigger on your own. And actually, the neat thing about this method too is when it comes to that 24-hour limit, or the 24-hour minimum, normally when you allocate a host, you would have to go and release that explicitly. Using host resource group or through License Manager, it's actually it's possible to say auto release this when it's not in use. So that way you would actually be able to you may be able to save money on that scale.
Nice.
Yeah, you hit it on the head also of like what a lot of our users are doing. You're mentioning user database code deployments on instances for blind runners and CI/CD runners, building apps. That's really what EC2 Mac was originally created to solve, and we still see most of our customers, I'd say, using.
Sean, if you want to, Sean Dolbeck, if you'd like to ask that, feel free to, unless you want me to read it off.
Oh, that's fine. I was just being lazy. So yeah, with this
Make me
being
do all the
deployed,
work.
I wonder if in the future Amazon intends to pre-make any popular software known to run well as one-click deployments to just make getting up to speed a little faster, a little easier. And of course, it's great to see them already pre-packaging it and offering it. Thank you.
No worries. And yeah, I guess the the short answer is the AWS Marketplace, the AMI Marketplace is where we see a lot of that. So we've seen images from CIS. We've seen some a lot of our partners like Virtuanka and HP Anywhere, for example, also for remote GUI support. These are things where you can actually just go out and get a marketplace image, and that actually even takes care of the licensing for it. Tart is like that as well. There's built into EC2 Mac also. There's some preloaded stuff. So since it's not just a vanilla Mac when you get this, you do also have access to Homebrew right out of the box. So it does make it a little easier to do if you wanted to get your kind of custom stack in place the way you want it. You can brew install 6-7 things and then take your image from that as well. That way you never have to do that again or until updates.
That's amazing. Can you give us any insight to what you guys are using to both manage it? I assume there's like a Puppet or Chef or Terraform, like you're saying, in the back end, or
well, honestly, the back end of EC2 Mac is it's based on AWS Nitro. And this is something I'm not sure how deep I can get into it right now, but it's basically a very privacy focused control plane. So yeah, it's something made to make sure that while we're ensuring the security of the physical, the data, the data in transit, that there's no window going from us to anything that you may be doing on there. Even with like in cases like support where we're going to need usually explicit, allow us in sort of things. So yeah, like the management itself, there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about it. I personally, I sometimes I'm weirdly lazy / unlazy, and I'll just click my way through the AWS console just because I can do it really quickly. I've got an Apple script and a matching-ish shell script called Instamac that can get me a Mac with one click if I need it to. There's I've got some Terraform examples as well. That's probably been, as far as the infrastructure as code, probably the most popular that I've come across. But yeah, what as far as kind of what we're doing is most of it is just in pursuit of enabling you to use whatever you want to spin it up. The biggest idea is to make this thing EC2 Mac another EC2 instance.
Another question from Jan in chat. It says, random question. Do you know what happens to the running Mac instance if you take an AMI image out of it? Does it shut down? Does it keep running?
Actually, there's checkbox for that. Checkbox is no reboot. So if it's checked, it won't reboot. And if it is checked, it reboots the instance. It usually takes about 15 minutes or so to come back up because it's a full reboot of not just the Mac, but the underlying hardware as well. So it's a little bit, since it's a little bit of a deeper reboot, that takes some time, but that also is usually the safest way to go about it. Apocryphally, in my own personal testing, just rapidly doing things, I've actually had a lot of success with no reboot.
I've got a question. So for those unaware, there is an AWS free tier. You get what is it? It's 12 months free for a certain amount of compute cycles, I believe it is. Is there a macOS instance for the free tier?
I do not believe there is any option in free tier for macOS. I will shamelessly say though, if you are interested in doing any sort of a proof of concept, that's the sort of thing we should get hooked up and understand more, because if you have a case in mind or just want to understand how things work in your environment, we're interested in making sure things work for you, and you get to spend more time with me. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, I will say that the free tier was invaluable to me when I was doing my AWS training. If you are not aware of it, just go to that link that I posted, aws.amazon.com/free. You get free 12 months, and it's great. It's really useful because you get to learn how things work. You can break things, you can build them up. Yeah.
And yeah, I've always said I try to have, sometimes I have a high AWS bill, and I try to have that so you guys don't have to. I try to do all this, as much testing as possible, so that if someone else is out in the field, there's not somebody else's money up for up for tests.
And of course, AWS is so affordable. It actually is.
They do our best.
And then Johan, next comment on him is interesting thinking about setup where AMI actually, where an instance takes an image of oneself. So reboot will be awesome. Just to confirm, the image is taken of the shutdown instance.
Yeah, it would be you could actually even do that with a running instance, either way. So yeah, if you had you could fire off an AWS EC2 I think it's create image command, and that would fire off to that actual that actual instance itself. I think I may even have some. I have some code that I can definitely share with you. Just a couple one-liners to even make that happen. So, if you want to reach out at any point, I hate duplicating work. So if there's ever something I've made that can be of benefit to people, I always want to get that out there, whether that's open source or just somebody asking.
Anybody else? All right.
Awesome questions.
Indeed. Well, Dave, it looks like nobody has any other questions, but thank you so much for coming and talking at our little meetup here. You're always more than welcome to come join us. And if you're ever in the Philly area, please hit us up. Where can people find you in Slack and or online? I know you posted it in the end of the presentation, but just so people are aware if they missed it.
No worries. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is the hot ones. This camera, this camera, this camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're working on.
Yep. So I'm on Mac admins at DS, so that should be an easy one. I once upon a time I had that Apple ID. I think I'm DS0X on GitHub, and I'm either DS0 in most other places. But yeah, definitely this is, I think I also have I think I started an Instagram ds.scpt because AppleScript, and wanted to put something aside with a little bit more content. So there will be more content there one day too.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on here. Invaluable information, always fun. And if anybody needs to reach you, we will reach out to you. I'm going to stop the recording now so we can do our off-camera chat for others. But if you are watching this recording at a future date, thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time. So I'm going to stop the recording.